Hey folks, Eric Moser here with Code Red Conversations. Thanks for joining me. In today's video, I'm going to be addressing the recent active shooter shooting event that took place in St. Louis at a local school. I'm going to be sharing some of what we know so far. It's still relatively early in this entire investigation and this entire event, but I believe that there's still some good information. There's still a lot that we can learn from this event. So we're going to jump right into the video. I'm going to share with you a recent press conference, a press conference that took place this morning. I'll share that information with you. We'll watch it. I'll pause it here and there throughout the course of this video, and I'll comment. But once again, I think that there's a tremendous amount of nuggets of information that we can glean from this video. And so for future reference, maybe you might find yourself in a similar situation down the road one day, God forbid. Or how did the school go about doing the things that they did? I think that this was very eye-opening. So without any further ado, let's jump right into the video.
Shooting inside of a high school. Let's go ahead, listen in live.
The threat here is over. However, we are going to continue to be vigilant in our schools and in our neighborhoods to be present and to be alert for the situations that could, create harm to our community. And in light of that, I want to talk about the importance of being aware. The old saying of see something, say something. Whether it be a family member, a neighbor, a student, a peer. If you're aware of an individual who appears to be suffering from some kind of mental illness or distress, and they begin speaking about purchasing firearms or causing harm to others, we encourage you to reach out to somebody and to report that.
He's bringing this up because it appears that there was some form of a manifesto or something along those lines left behind by the shooter. And some of the details are pretty chilling.
So that we can get help to that individual. It's important that all of us be engaged so that we can try to intercede as early as possible in a person's life to try and prevent a tragedy from occurring. This morning, we want to...
Real quick, y'all, I think a lot of times in situations like this, when people don't say anything, I think most people don't expect something like this to go down in their neighborhood or in their life. They think that happens somewhere else. But the advice he's giving is very good. If you see something, if you hear someone say something that's concerning, something that is alarming, tell somebody. Because that could be the difference between saving a life or someone losing their life.
I don't have any additional information on the status of the victims. We're not aware of any of them having been released since yesterday, those who were admitted. As we find out as they're released, we'll let you know. But I would like to do is share some of the images of the weapon that was used by the suspect. I know yesterday one of the questions was, how many weapons did the suspect use or have in his possession at the time of the incident? And we know now that he had in his possession one rifle, an AR-15 style rifle, a .223 caliber. I think we've got an image of that we can put up for you. Suspect brought into the school and used. Note that first time I saw it large, there is no forward handguard on that rifle, which is unusual. See the gas tube going back there. The suspect, in addition to the rifle, brought in a large quantity of ammunition. He had 7 magazines of ammunition on a chest rig that he wore. He He also had an additional 8 magazines of ammunition in a field bag that he had carried. This doesn't include the number of magazines that he left and dumped on the stairway in the corridors along the way. But it appears that he came into the building with more than 600 rounds of ammunition on his person.
Now, the question that, as far as I can recall, I hadn't heard as of yet was because someone asked a question, how did he get into the school? And that's a question that's still up in the air. That hasn't been, for some reason, that hasn't been addressed yet. Why? I don't know. But hopefully in this, listening through this whole press conference, they'll actually address it.
One of the other questions that came up yesterday was there a manifesto that was left when the FBI had gone through the vehicle that had been parked there that he used to drive to the school. There was some paperwork in it. The detectives had gone through much of it last evening. There was a document that he had created, handwritten, and in there he spoke about his desire to engage in this incident, to conduct this school shooting. I'll read one portion from that notebook in which he had written. He wrote, quote, "I don't have any friends. I don't have any family. I've never had a girlfriend. I've never had a social life. I've been an isolated loner my entire life. This was the perfect storm for a mass shooter." End quote.
Wow. Now I know a lot of people that could basically say the same thing early on in their life. 19 years old, you're kind of an outcast. But to say you're going to turn around, now I know he probably or obviously was dealing with some form of mental health issue, I would assume, but who knows really, especially in this world that we're living in now. But most people, you clearly aren't completely, you clearly aren't completely sane if you can decide to, just because you've had a bad life, decide you're going to go into a school with 600 rounds of ammo and shoot up the school and kill 2 people and injure 7. But I don't know, that doesn't seem like a surefire recipe for deciding you want to just, kill 2 people and injure 7. Doesn't make any sense to me. But what do I know? Very sad.
So in reading this, we could see, some of what's going on inside his mind. He feels isolated, he feels alone, quite possibly angry and resentful of others who have what appeared to him to be healthy relationships, and so a desire to lash out. So this goes back to what I spoke about earlier, the critical importance of all of us being engaged with our family members, with our peers at work or at school or in our neighborhood, because when we're more engaged with one another, we're more aware of what each person is going through, we can do what we can to try and seek help for them, even if that's just reporting it to authorities. At this time, I believe the mayor would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Chief. Good morning. Last night I attended a vigil in Tower Grove Park with more than 100 people who gathered to honor the victims of yesterday's tragedy. They shared a wide range of emotions: frustration, anger, grief, and others felt impassioned to do more for their community. But even for those who didn't feel the need to stand up and speak, I know that tragic incidents like this can traumatize our youth, our children, our teachers, and the larger community. Let me be absolutely clear. The scourge of gun violence that continues to claim the lives of our children and families in their communities is a national emergency. It's a public health crisis that requires federal action. But at the local level, we want our community members to know that they are not alone. If you're experiencing trauma or other mental health concerns or just need someone to talk to about this, you can for free by calling VHR's 24/7 365 helpline and Youth Connection helpline. you can dial 988. Or you can call, if you're a young person and want to talk to someone, you can call 314-819-8802. Or you can text Be Heard, BHEARD, or 31658. In addition,
Let me just pause here real quick, y'all. I want to share this bit of info with you, something I just pulled up from off my phone. This is from 2021, May of 2021. Remember, and this is coming from the same mayor. All right, so keep this in mind. Mayor Tashora Jones, budget proposal would close a city jail, divert $4 million from the police to, you guessed it, social programs, and cut nearly 100 police jobs. This same mayor in the city, and this is St. Louis. St. Louis's murder rate already the highest in the United States from last year. Highest murder rate. You proposed to close the city jail and to defund the police and cut 100 police jobs. This is the same person here. Now, I'm not blaming her for this shooting, but what I am blaming her for is creating a culture within law enforcement or within a society, or encouraging a crime-riddled city to continue to do more crime. It doesn't make any sense. It just does not make any sense. And people like this need to be held accountable because they've demonstrated themselves to be very inconsistent. Very inconsistent. Again, I'm not blaming her for the shooting, but who knows if you had more officers on the scene. And we'll get into all that shortly. We'll get into who was on scene and what their status was, whether they were armed or not, here in a couple of minutes.
I want to reiterate my sincerest appreciation for the police officers, the fire department, our school security, school staff, and others that responded quickly without hesitation. Some parents, like myself, woke up this morning wondering if it's safe to send their children back to school in St. Louis. My son woke up around 1:30 this morning to call me from upstairs instead of coming downstairs. That's what kids do nowadays. Because he needed to talk. And as a mother, you try to reassure your children, reassure your child that everything's going to be okay. And I honestly felt like the safest place and the best place for him today was to go back to school, to be with school counselors who are going to be there to help him process, his teachers that care about him. And
I don't know about y'all, but if my kid was at a school, I don't know if her kid was in that school, but if my kid was in a situation where there was if I was in the city, if I lived in the city and there was an active shooting and my child, one of my kids was concerned about, wanted to talk and was worried about it and didn't want to go to school, I'm not going to tell them to go to school the next day. I'm definitely not going to do that. And yes, I know the odds of a school shooting taking place I know the odds are relatively low and they're rare, but it is increasing. And I think the way I feel is that they would be safer staying with me, not going to school, at least for a day or two. Allow them to work through this situation, allow them to work through their emotions under the care of someone other than the school. But then again, she's enacted some pretty progressive policies. And like I always say, I think these people on the political left, I think that some of them have some good intentions in mind, but they don't think their policies through in the long term. Defunding the police, but I'm dumbfounded how that could even remotely sound good at all. That's got to be one of the most idiotic policies I've ever heard in my life. But I think that their mindset is always how people feel, and they put very little emphasis on the long-term repercussions of a specific policy or creating a new law or whatever rule that they decide to pursue. They don't think about how will this work out 6 months, a year, 2 years, 10 years down the road. They don't think about that. They think about what makes people feel comfortable or what is interpreted as being nice or being caring. They don't think about how things impact people in the long run. And here's another example.
Staff that care about them. But unfortunately, mass shootings have happened in almost every corner of our country. Suburban schools in Columbine and Parkland, a rural community in Uvalde. Because of this grim reality, the St. Louis Police Department, St. Louis Public Schools, our charter schools, and the Mayor's Office of Children, Youth, and Families have been conducting frequent trainings on how to respond to emergency situations like what we experienced yesterday. Trainings and active shooter drills are essential to ensuring that they responded as quickly as they did.
Trainings and these shootings, she acknowledges the fact that these are happening all over the country in various areas and various cities and towns and states, but yet you still push to defund the police. What can you even say to that?
And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Brown, Deputy Superintendent of Student Support Services for St. Louis Public Schools. Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Good morning. At this time, we are supporting our school and the community. This morning, we activated 3 different resources. We have an in-person site for our 2 schools. We also have a virtual site that we email to those schools, staff, students, and parents as well. And we also increased our resources that we have online. If you go to slps.org, there's a mental health tab that will direct you to many of our resources that we use, that our students use, and that our staff use. So at this time, we are working on a long-term plan. We're collaborating with our community partners, as well as the Mayor's Office and the U.S. Department of Education. So we're working at this time to really come up with a next steps long-term plan for what we're about to encounter with our students and staff and families as well. Thank you.
In my opinion, personally, get your kid out of public school. Get your kid out of public school. And I push that. I've been an advocate for that for a long time now. And I know it's not easy for everyone. I understand that. But with the worldview that they often promote, a godless worldview based in evolutionary principles, steeped in materialism, and I'm not talking about talking about money, I'm talking about materialism, no God. The sexual immorality that is often promoted. I don't understand. I think we as parents need to consider deeply what we're allowing our children to hear or be indoctrinated into. There's something to consider, y'all. I think, but something to take to deeply consider.
Good morning. In regarding the training that officers receive from St. Louis Public Schools, it was a collaboration with St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, where we, alongside of them, were engaged in an active shooter training that took place about a month and a half ago. And from that training, a lot of the things that the officers exhibited yesterday were the things that we learned during that session. We continue to have those ongoing sessions with our people, despite the fact that we know that we're in that space.
Now, I give them props for that because there are a lot of places, I've read many an article over the last year or two where the public schools protested, I'm talking about staff primarily, and some teachers protested against the idea of having the students and faculty go through active shooter training because they were worried about how it would make the kids feel. They were worried about it being traumatizing to the kid. Forget the fact that if an actual active shooter event took place, how traumatizing that would be and how bad it would be if you were totally unprepared. So I'll at least give them credit here for having some protocol for a situation like this.
So these are some of the things that we've been initiating and putting in place. Dr. Brown talked about long-term. The goal for us is to try to make schools as safe as possible, but to make sure that we're prepared for whatever comes to those buildings. So
Now, make a note, mental note of that, y'all. He said his goal was to make these schools as safe as possible. Stay tuned through the Q&A till they get to the Q&A section because he's going to be asked a very good question in along those lines. And just listen to his response. It's only a few more minutes left, I believe.
officers were aware of what happened, understood the magnitude of what was happening, but we were also prepared for what was happening.
Can you give your name?
I'm sorry, DeAndre, D-E-A-N-D-R-E, last name Davis, D-A-V-I-S. And I'm the Director of Safety and Security for St. Louis Public Schools.
All right, we'll open it up for questions.
Here we
Can
go.
you tell us where the suspect was shot inside the school? What room?
So that would be on the third floor, a room adjacent to the library. I don't know the room number offhand, but it was on the third floor.
Did Orlando Harris buy this gun legally? Can you confirm for us the gun show where he tried to buy this gun, and then the private dealer, what do you know about that? Who was that, and will there be any kind of recourse for that sale?
Sure, so we're not going to talk a lot about those particular types of items because there's an ongoing investigation. We're partnered, of course, with the ATF, looking into those matters. So, but there is an ongoing investigation. We've been able to develop quite a bit of information, and we need to pursue that. That's going to take a little bit of time.
What are your thoughts, though, on the fact that he was able to buy this from a private dealer, from a private sale?
So, in generally speaking, when you go to a firearms dealer, there's a background check that's done. It's possible to do a individual sale. There are some loopholes in the law, which they're referred to, and what that does is it removes any backstop that might have existed that would have prevented someone from getting a firearm when they should not have had it, whether they be a convicted felon or a person with a mental health issue. So I think it's important that we have background checks whenever anybody buys a firearm so that we can ensure that that backstop isn't removed. Because that's a hindrance to ensure the safety of the community as a whole.
Is that what happened in this situation, or did he buy the gun?
That's, I was just speaking in general terms. In this particular case, ma'am, we're going to go through our investigation, make a determination as to what happened, and if we're able to proceed with any criminal charges, we'll do that.
You said he had no priors, but did he have juvenile priors?
So that's all closed record, everything related to juvenile.
Based on the level of ammunition, how impactful was it that you had more than the number of officers in that area?
Yeah, it was critical. You know, the 600 rounds is a lot of ammunition. I don't know if anybody's a shooter or not, but it doesn't take long to burn through a magazine as you're looking down a long corridor or up or down a stairwell or into a classroom. This could have been a horrific scene. It was not, by the grace of God, and that the officers were as close as they were and responded in the manner that they did, coordinating not only with the school officers, but with EMS, our dispatch center. Everybody worked well together. We've trained in this before. As you've heard, I went through our active shooter class about a month ago, but everybody in our department goes through it. We do it about once a year. It's good to have that reinforced. I was speaking
Now, I think once a year is good to have. To train an active shooter is better than nothing. But in order to develop any level of proficiency, that training needs to take place on a much more frequent basis in order for muscle memory to be established and for everyone to understand the various positions. Now, I don't know what kind of individual training that they have as a department, so I'm not trying to jump on them and be ultra critical because I'm just unaware. But I do know that once a year is not good, and it definitely needs to occur more frequently. But again, how they handle things on an individual squad level. Here's a quick story. I can recall a time where we would get our quarter, like I think it was like once or twice a year. The people is MACTAC is the acronym for the active shooter training that we would go through. And we had the guys from the MACTAC department come in and evaluate us as a squad in our area command. And one time they came through and we did piss poor. We did horribly. And I was embarrassed, honestly. I was just absolutely embarrassed as to how poorly I did. So I remember going to our sergeant, and then our sergeant took it to the lieutenant. And we came up with the idea of a couple of times a week during briefing, once briefing was done, especially on days where there wasn't much to report for the outgoing shift for us who were coming on. Before the shift came to a close, as far as graveyard shift came to a close, and I was working days, before we went on the streets, we would take 10, 15 minutes to address some of the issues and practice the positions in active shooter in an active shooter formation. And we would go through the area command, just simulating the different positions, the breacher, the entry teams, the rear guard, so on and so forth, so that we understood what every position, like we understood it unquestionably. There was no doubt that we would know what to do and how to respond if we just happened to be on a situation and you had officers from other area commands. We wanted to make sure that when it came down to us and me and my sister squad, that we knew what we were doing. And then after a few weeks of doing that, man, when they came through to reevaluate us, man, we killed that test. And then we practiced that. We kept that as a regular habit, as a routine for us, so that we knew what to do and we would only improve. And so I'm just saying, once a year is better than nothing. And they were able to handle the situation by the grace of God, thankfully, without it being much worse. But I think that as an individual officer, for anybody who's out there, if you're a cop and you're only doing training once a year because it's mandatory, that's not good. That's not good. You need to step it up.
Speaking to a commander this morning, and one of the best parts about it is when we sign up for the class, you're not signing up, as your entire unit or squad. You're just signing up with other random officers from across the city. So you may not even know who they are when you go through your training, which worked out well here, because we had officers from a number of different districts, a number of different specialized assignments, who may not even have known one another. But because of the training, they all knew what needed to be done. They created their teams, and they went in and they took action. Sure.
You had said yesterday it was a little unclear what happened at the point of entry, whether those security guards were armed. So I'd like to ask Mr. Andre Davis, the Director of School Security, could you tell us what's known at this time about, at that checkpoint where he got in, some of the students said the security guards only had nightsticks or flashlights. Are these security guards, were they armed with guns to stop this sort of thing from even starting?
So he did not enter a checkpoint.
Yeah, so they had
Okay, understood.
Thank you.
But
He did not enter a checkpoint?
the officers that are stationed in schools are not armed. The officers who respond to calls to schools are armed. We have about 25 officers that are armed with St. Louis Public Schools, but the ones that are stationed inside of buildings are not armed.
And in light of this, had they been armed, could they have stopped it before we even had a shooting? Should you have armed security guards to protect our children?
For some people, that would cause a stir of some sort, but for us,
Did you hear that? Let me rewind that. So you can hear that gibberish that came out of his mouth.
stationed inside of buildings are not armed.
And in light of this, had they been armed, could they have stopped it before we even had a shooting? Should you have armed security guards to protect our children?
Excellent
For
question.
some people, that would cause a stir of some sort, but for us, we thought it's best for our officers, for our the normalcy of school for kids to not have officers armed in the school. Again, our mobile officers, they visit the schools every day.
But I mean,
Around the clock.
Is that gonna be under review? I mean, have we learned our lesson that all feelings aside about a kid seeing the sight of a gun, it's better to see a security guard with a gun than a guy in camo coming in?
And that's
Are you gonna
perspective.
review that to have?
That's perspective, yes, sir.
Y'all mentioned yesterday
This is the main reason. This section right here was the main reason I wanted to address this whole incident. The gentleman, I wonder who that reporter was, because that was the question of the day. Did the security guards, you had 2 security guards in school who walk around with nightsticks and flashlights. Were they armed? And clearly they were not. And the reason why? Because for some students and teachers and parents, I'm assuming, that would cause a stir, he says. But now what you have in hindsight, of course, hindsight is always 20/20. We get that. But in hindsight, we realize that that would have been a good idea. That would have been an excellent idea. And instead of having someone feel a little uncomfortable, which they would have adjusted to by now, you decide to make sure that the 2 officers roving the school aren't armed, that they don't have the equipment necessary to protect your children. That just shows you how just like I referenced earlier, when it comes down to policy making, these people don't think long term. They don't think big picture. They think about how it makes people feel. And when you're so focused on feelings, this is the society that we get. When you get a society of quote unquote snowflakes, a society of people who are so sensitive about every little thing that they don't even seriously consider the safety of their kids, of their community. Again, they would rather people felt good. They would rather people feel good as opposed to actually be safe. And again, he asked them how they didn't even address how the shooter managed to make it in. And there was a little talk between I'm assuming the chief of police or whatever he is, the sheriff, and the head of security there, which I wonder what his credentials are or were as far as the head of security for the school. There's a little talk, and it's almost like they don't want people to know. How did this guy manage to get in? So the mere fact that they failed to acknowledge that question so far makes me draw the conclusion, and I could be completely wrong, but it makes me want to draw the conclusion that somebody failed, somebody screwed up, and they don't want to address that yet, for whatever reason.
How the school and the police department itself are proud of how everyone responded. Could both of y'all just give a couple of quick statements about that? And is it the shooter training drill, everyone working together? Is that why this was kind of stopped before it could have gotten worse? Obviously, it was a tragedy, but they did things right. Absolutely.
Chief Sachs's point, our officers were there directing the responding officers.
Yeah, and they would have been more effective had they actually been armed. They could have done a whole lot more had they actually had firearms on them. They could have potentially, we can never know, 100%, but they could have potentially stopped the threat before it even began. Or this guy might not have even attacked the school because he knew that it was a potentially hardened target. He graduated last year, so I'm assuming that, well, I can't assume. I don't know if their policies have changed where they had armed police at one point, and then they changed it and decided not to have armed security or armed police there. I don't know. But the mere fact that no one was armed there allowed him to be able to do the damage that he did instead of being potentially stopped before he made entry or shortly thereafter. Now, once again, I'm thankful that the officers responded quickly and that a bad and tragic situation wasn't even worse. But what could have potentially been done had those security guards or school police, whatever they are, whatever their title is, how could things have been different had those officers been armed and prepared to respond immediately, as opposed to waiting for a guy to be able to make it all the way up to the third floor?
Directly where the shooter was, the outline of the building, how to get to the building. They were part of the teams that made entry into the building, so that collaboration worked. The drills worked. The kids worked. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. They barricaded those doors. They got away from those windows, and when it was time to evacuate, they did the best they could. They got out of that building.
All right, thank you all.
Chief, a couple more questions, please.
Thank you all. Respond to that.
Chief, we've been sending emails for the last 12 hours.
Thank you all. Hey, can we get those pictures?
Once again, this is the very latest being provided to us from all of the officials in St. Louis High School, where again, they had just yesterday a gunman open fire inside of the school, killing 2 people. We've learned a bit more information on those 2 people. It was a 61-year-old woman as well as a 16-year-old girl. They both had died from this shooting. The gunman also exchanged gunfire with officers who had responded to the incident at this school. And they did shoot.
Now, I want to show a little respect for the individuals who were actually killed during this event, during this tragedy. I want to at least let us recognize them, acknowledge who they were, and just talk about them a bit. Very sad. So I just want to pull up this article here shortly. And then I'll just share with you a few more of my thoughts. St. Louis school shooting victims, an always smiling teen, a passionate, loving teacher. Alexandria Bell on the left, and Jean Kuska. Here's a little bit, here's Alexandria, 15 years old. 15. And here's Jean Kuska, I believe that's a proper pronunciation. Forgive me if I got it wrong. 61-year-old mother of 5 and grandmother of 6 who loved Jimmy Buffett. She began her career in 2002 with the St. Louis Public School and began working at that school specifically in 2008. This terrible, y'all. Honestly, on so many levels. But for me as a former police officer, former soldier, someone who likes to discuss and address the issues of personal protection and self-defense, I can't help but want to go back to the fact that the schools are often soft targets. And in light of the policies from the little article I read from Fox News in reference to that mayor of St. Louis who sought to defund the police last year, despite the fact that St. Louis has the highest murder rate as of 2021 in the nation. I think I forget. I think recently I think it was Louisiana, like Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I think that might actually have the highest murder rate right now. But considering the fact that Missouri has a severe crime issue, yet these people still enact some of the most ridiculous policies. So, just in hindsight, in light of the fact that we understand that school shootings happen, and it seems to be happening on a more frequent basis for whatever reason, and I mean we can go on and on of why that may be. Culturally speaking, once again, I believe that as we walk further away from God, and if we see ourselves as pond scum, just nothing but evolved pond scum, why should we be concerned about the livelihood or the life or the well-being of anyone else? Honestly, like on the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. And the further we move away from God, the further we subtract ourselves from the biblical principles that, as flawed as it was, that were a part of the founding of this country, we will see things like this occur more and more. That's just a harsh reality. And I just pray that more people people start to wake up. People just need to start waking up. I say it over and over again. I think that the Democratic Party is the party of death, period. Because their policies lead to more and more death and harm than anybody else. And people need to start acknowledging that reality. The party of death, the abortion rate, the amount of dead babies at the feet of these people, honestly, them enacting and enforcing these policies, they're basically running this whole midterm campaign on the fear that women won't be able to kill their kids. That's basically what they're going on. And they're hoping and praying that would keep them in power. Forget the fact that the economy's tore up. Forget the fact, we won't even get into the fact because I don't even think, we heard what Stacey Abrams said not that long ago. They barely even acknowledge the fact that the baby is an actual baby. The border's wide open. You have millions of people coming in from God knows where. You have all kinds of fentanyl, all types of drugs, all types of sex trafficking, human trafficking taking place. These people don't care. Don't care. Can barely get any. The food prices going through the roof. They're trying to promote transgenderism and all this sexual immorality in our schools. But hey, as long as people feel okay about it, they don't give a damn. Excuse my language. They don't care. And I'm hoping that as time goes on, people start equating these dumb behind policies, defund the police. How many more lives were lost as a result of defund the police? Easily 5,000. The homicide rate was up by 5,000 in 2020 and 2021 because of this whole defund or abolish the police movement. They are the party of death. They don't care. All they want is to stay in power. And people need to wake up and pay attention to what's going on. And I know it's not simply about politics. I know there's a much deeper issue going on, a much deeper spiritual issue, as I just mentioned. But you can't separate the two. You cannot separate the two. They want to take away your ability to be able to defend yourself. And here's a prime example. Some progressive decided, hey, you know what? We want to make sure that these kids don't feel uncomfortable. So we're not going to arm our students. We're not going to arm our security or our police who are working in the school. This is what happens, y'all. Please start to pay attention. But before you go, make sure you comment down below. I'd love to know what you think. Do you agree with me on the points I made as far as what could have been a potential safeguard to keep this from happening? If you have ideas or ways that you think that this could have been presented or this could have been prevented other than the ideas that I mentioned, I'd love to hear your comments. So comment down below. Thanks for joining me, y'all, especially those of you who joined me in the live chat. And as always, in the meantime, stay safe. God bless. and make sure you join the conversation.